Branwell was very like his sisters, Charlotte, Emily and Anne, almost insignificantly small, one of his life's trials. He had a mass of red hair, which he wore brushed high off his forehead, to help his height, I fancy. A great, bumpy, intellectual forehead, nearly half the size of the whole facial contour. Small, ferrety eyes, deep sunk, and still further hidden by the never-removed spectacles. Prominent nose, but weak lower features. He had a downcast look, which never varied, save for a rapid momentary glance at long intervals. Small and thin of person, he was the reverse of attractive at first sight. This plain specimen of humanity, who died unhonoured, might have made the world of literature and art ring with the name of which he was so proud.
Please, the humanities. Yes. Poetry, painting, music. Exactly. Oh, these are the very air that our society breathes, rather than destroy us, Reverend Miller. Oh, here they are. I return home to find my poor father overrun with the entire clergy of Yorkshire, and not a pot of tea to be seen, and my sisters holding back the new curate in the kitchen. Branwell Brontë, how do you do, sir?
On June the 26th, in 1817, more than 200 years ago, in front of the fireplace in the little cottage that served as the village parsonage, in Thornton, on the outskirts of Bradford, Patrick Branwell Brontë came into this world. The fourth child of the Reverend Patrick Brontë and his beloved wife Maria. He was named after his father, and also given his mother's maiden name. There was much excitement at his arrival. Patrick in particular was overjoyed at the birth. A scholar as well as a vicar, he had high hopes for his only son. He would school him himself in the classics and make a fine man of him. The only brother in a family of sisters, he was the spoiled darling of the family, but he was also, like his sisters, highly talented. Branwell has been largely forgotten by all but the most dedicated of Brontë aficionados, and certainly dismissed as the black sheep of the family, the bad apple, the total failure. Yet there is much more to Branwell Brontë. Who wouldn't have loved to sit alongside him in the Black Bull on Haworth Main Street, where he was given free drinks as a renowned raconteur, for entertaining the passing clientele on what was then a busy, bustling thoroughfare for traders and pack-horse drivers. It is said that he possessed the ability to write and translate Greek with one hand and Latin with his other. We too might have been persuaded to fill his glass again and again, until the landlord said no more and sent for one of his long-suffering sisters to see him home to his bed. The father, upright, handsome, Distantly courteous, white-haired, tall, knowing me as his son's friend, he would treat me in the Grandisonian fashion, coming himself down to the little inn to invite me, a boy at that time, up to his house, where I would be coldly uncomfortable until I could escape with Branwell to the moors. Branwell, this generous gentleman in all his ideas, this madman in many of his acts, died at 28, of grief for a woman. But at 22, what a splendid specimen of brain power! Running wild he was. What glorious talent he still had to waste. That rector of Haworth little knew how to bring up and bring the best out of his clever family, and the boy least of all. He was a hard, matter-of-fact man. So the girls worked their own way to fame and death, the boy to death only. He would discourse with wondrous knowledge upon subjects, moral, intellectual, philosophical, for hours, and afterwards accompany his audience to the nearest public house, and recruit his exhausted powers by copious libations. He was proud of his name, his strength, and his abilities. In his fits of passion I have seen him drive his clenched fist through the panel of a door. It seemed to soothe him. It certainly bruised his knuckles. At times we would drive over in a gig to Haworth and visit his people. He was then at his best, and would be eloquent and amusing, although sometimes he would burst into tears when returning, and swear that he meant to amend. I believe, however, that he was half mad, and could not control himself. Life threw repeated punches at Branwell, but within this series of unfortunate events there was happiness and worth. Physically small, he had flaming red hair, was impulsive and quick-witted, and had a penchant for showing off in company. However, he also had an erratic and emotional nature that prevented him from making the most of his talents. We must not forget, though, that the Brontë brother grew up in the same literature-charged environment as his three siblings. For much of their young lives, they collaborated on fantasy sagas, set in the worlds of Glasstown and Angria. The siblings wrote the tales in tiny books and acted them out together. But Branwell was at the centre of this universe, often dictating the events of the saga or writing long parliamentary speeches and war epics. Branwell Brontë was a tortured, sensitive soul, who lacked the self-discipline that guided his sisters to literary heights. When he was 4 years old, he witnessed the long, slow, painful death of his mother to ovarian cancer, and felt the overwhelming grief of his father, who could hardly bear to listen to the innocent yet distressing prattle of his 6 children. When his 2 older sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, aged just 11 and 10, succumbed to the deadly tuberculosis that claimed so many during that era, within weeks of being brought home ill from school, Their younger brother, who had stayed behind to be taught by his father, must have witnessed more suffering than was bearable for one so young. As busy, sad and demanding as his life was, Reverend Brontë continued to teach Branwell and had high hopes for his future, paying for his painting lessons and playing games in his free time outside of parish duties. He bought Branwell wooden toy soldiers that in turn led to the creation of the children's imaginary world of Angria for Charlotte and Branwell, and Gondal for Emily and Anne, written by hand in the tiny books, many of which are now proudly housed in their former home as an example of all their blossoming talents. A willing scholar with a precocious intellect, Branwell translated Horace to critical acclaim, wrote poetry, played the organ in his father's church, and aspired to being a professional portrait painter. The young siblings were incredibly close, living in a fantasy world fired by their imaginations. Within this world, the adolescent Branwell was king. But it was Branwell's plans to become an artist which began the slow road to destruction. An anecdote recalls his visit to London in an attempt to enroll at the Royal Academy, and ended in him spending all the money his father had provided in a local tavern and coming home in shame. It is unclear whether this really happened. Branwell certainly wrote a letter seeking admittance in 1835, but recent research suggests he never actually posted it or made the trip. Branwell certainly did attempt to support himself with his painting in Bradford in 1838 and 1839, before returning to the family home of Haworth in debt. He continued to try his hand at writing, penning his own magazine called Branwell's Blackwoods Magazine, filled with his poems, plays and criticisms, and repeatedly writing to the real Blackwoods magazine to seek employment. His 6 letters went unanswered. Around this time, Branwell also started making friends in the local pub and developing the drinking problem that would continue throughout his short life. When he was 19 years old, he was secretary to the Temperance Society in the village, and it was not until after that he learned to drink. It was not correct that the landlord of the Bull had anything to do with teaching him, though it was quite true that he used to sit in the back parlour there and drink almost constantly of an evening when he was older. The villagers encouraged him to drink, but if he could not have got drink there, he would have been sure to have got it somewhere else. But he was a fine talker, Branwell, and such a talker. Aye, and when he was at the worst, he never missed coming to the Sunday school with his sisters. They all used to come regularly. as each of the siblings worked on their writing with the aim of getting published. Branwell remained an influential figure in the family. Although later eclipsed, he was the first of the Brontes to be published, his poems appearing in local and national newspapers during the 1840s, and his sisters' novels incorporate the shadow of their brother at every turn. Branwell himself even formed the basis of the sisters' most sensational male characters, with Hindley Earnshaw in Emily's Wuthering Heights and Arthur Huntington in Anne's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, incorporating the more problematic elements of Branwell's personality. Although his influence was not always positive, Branwell remained a primary muse for his sisters, and we should remember him as a major inspiration for their creative process. Branwell was a good lad enough, she says, until the serpent beguiled him, and she thinks he has been made out to be a good deal worse than he really was. Nancy could manage him better than anyone else when his fits of fury were upon him, and Branwell seemed to have a real affection for his old nurse. He often wanted to paint her portrait, but she declined because she did not consider herself attractive enough. The most famous painting of the Bronte sisters, in fact the only group portrait in existence, hangs in the National Portrait Gallery in London, depicting Anne, Emily and the eldest sister Charlotte, arranged around a small table holding a book, the first two sisters separated from the third by a pillar. The artist was none other than Branwell, and over the almost 2 centuries since it was painted, a pale ghost has gradually appeared beneath the pillar that separates the sisters. The ghost is Branwell himself, as tests proved in 2015, originally the 4th figure in the portrait, but then painted out after deciding he didn't like his appearance in it. In January 1840, Branwell started work as a tutor for the Postlethwaite family in Broughton-in-Furness, continuing his literary work on the side by writing poems and translations of classical works. By June 1840, he'd been sacked from the job, and in April 1841 got a job as a clerk for Manchester and Leeds Railway. He was sacked from that job in 1842 after some money was stolen by a third party while Branwell was out drinking. There has never been a question that Branwell stole the money, merely that he neglected his accountancy duties, preferring instead to seek the company of artists and scholars who met regularly at the Lord Nelson in London and in the taverns of nearby Halifax. That being said, he wasn't entirely blameless. He certainly drank heavily and even partook of opium, often considered the drug of thinkers. 9 months later, Branwell was hired to tutor the Reverend Edmund Robinson's son at Thorpe Green, where his sister Anne had been governess since 1840. At first things went well, but over the time he spent there, Branwell wrote to several friends about his romantic interest in the Reverend's wife, Lydia, who was 17 years older than him. Branwell wrote, "My master is generous, but my mistress is damnably too fond of me." Branwell claimed that she seduced him. Whether this scenario was entirely in Branwell's imagination and the infatuation one-sided has often been debated. But he believed Lydia Robinson was the one whom I must till death call my wife. The household staff had started gossiping, which led to Lydia's husband threatening to come after Branwell with a shotgun if he returned from his vacation. After this episode he had a complete nervous breakdown. The downhill slide had gained momentum. "I have lain during 9 long weeks utterly shattered in body and broken down in mental despair," he wrote. Events took a turn for the worse after the death of Lydia's husband, Reverend Robinson. Branwell attempted to rekindle his relationship with Lydia, but was rebuffed, and over the next 3 years he descended into self-pity, alcoholism and drug abuse. He began begging friends for money for alcohol, embarrassing his family, and even once set fire to his own bed, requiring his father Patrick to share a bed with him to protect the family. "I know only," Branwell wrote in 1847, the year before he died, "that it is time for me to be something when I am nothing." There was, recorded Charlotte, an emptiness to his whole existence. Branwell died aged 31 on the 24th of September 1848 at Haworth, in the room which he had shared with his father for so long. His cause of death was recorded as chronic bronchitis marasmus. Most now believe that he died from acute tuberculosis, aggravated by alcoholism, drug use, specifically opium and laudanum, and delirium tremens. He was placed in the family vault 4 days later. His elder sister Charlotte wrote 3 weeks after his death, "When I looked upon the noble face and forehead of my dead brother, I seemed to receive an oppressive revelation of the feebleness of humanity, of the inadequacy of genius to lead to true greatness. It was a terrible lesson to learn. I do not weep from a sense of bereavement, but for the wreck of talent, the ruin of promise, the ultimate dreary extinction of what might have been a burning and shining light. Till the last hour comes, we never know how much we can forgive, pity, regret. All his vices were and are nothing now." Branwell died never knowing of his sisters' growing fame and success as talented authors. They never told him because they knew he could not bear it. As Charlotte explained, We could not tell him of our efforts, for fear of causing him too deep a pang of remorse for his own time misspent and talents misapplied. They understood he had lost his way, and their love for him never wavered. My dear friends, I hope you enjoyed our little sojourn in Haworth, and I've just found out after doing all that narration that it's not pronounced Haworth. It's apparently pronounced Haworth, according to the Google. You can listen to it here.
Haworth.
So I've been saying it wrong. So once this gets to YouTube, there's probably going to be a stampede of people from England who are going to place me in the pillories for pronouncing that wrongly. I do apologize before I get pelted with, stones instead of tomatoes. Sorry about that. Haworth. Haworth sounds right to me. That just sounds right. That's my excuse. All right, apologies for that. I've never been to Haworth before, so that might be the reason why I have pronounced it incorrectly. My apologies to the good people of Haworth, and if I ever go to the pub there, I will make sure that I do not get it wrong. That would not be a good idea. Well, I was first introduced to Branwell Brontë with this book, a biography by Winifred Guerin. The book is no longer in print, I believe, but you can still get copies of it. You can find them on the internet. I can highly recommend this. It's a very good biography. It got me so interested in the Brontes, and I never even knew about Branwell at that stage. I didn't even know they had a brother. I had heard of the Brontes because of Wuthering Heights. That's another story. I had desperately planned I was going to do a drawing, an illustration of Cathy. Oh, the cat's going again. Of Cathy at Heathcliff's window. The ghost of Cathy. I was going to do it, and I never got round to doing it. What a shame. Well, my little animation at the start and at the end of the presentation is my little tribute to that unfulfilled project. Any of you like Wuthering Heights? Were you a fan of it? Or are you a fan of it? Also Kate Bush, her song Wuthering Heights, fantastic. And to think that she wrote and sang that song at the age of 18, absolutely amazing. Apparently, she had been watching the last 10 minutes of the 1967 BBC miniseries based on the book Wuthering Heights, and she wrote that within a few minutes, that song. Isn't that incredible? She's a genius. I'm going off track here. Yes, Branwell Brontë. And by the way, the Brontë Museum is situated in the Haworth Parsonage, and it is open. If you're ever visiting from overseas, I've never been there, but I've heard it's very good. If you're interested in the Brontë sisters and now Branwell, well, go and check it out. We'll have a look at that in a minute on the website. Poor Branwell. All that talent, all that genius, and he just didn't have the self-discipline, which without that self-discipline, it's like a wild horse running free. You just can't rein it in. Once he got into the drugs and drink, there was no turning back. What a shame. What a shame. But his sisters loved him and obviously thought of him right up until the end, didn't let him know of their increasing success, which is a beautiful thing, really. Mind you, I would like to go back in time and go and have a drink with Branwell and his little corner stool there, right near the fireplace with a pipe. Did they used to share those pipes? Did you see the pipe in the illustration? Let's have a quick look. They must have shared those pipes. How gruesome. With today's hygiene standards. I actually have one of those clay pipes, not the long version as seen in that previous illustration. This is the short version. Apparently they were disposable, made to be disposable. I guess it was the first beginnings of the throwaway society. They were made of thin clay, so often they were just dropped or thrown away after a while. I got this, I think my mum got this at the auctions for me. I've had this since my early teens. And I actually used to smoke this. When I got to about 16 or 17, I was smoking this. Not for long though. God, it was rough on the throat. No filter, you know. My goodness, I was heading the way of Branwell, I was, with all that drugs and drink. Except I didn't have the genius. That was sadly lacking, but there was enough of the former. Enough, more than enough. Spiralling out of control, but I managed to rein in that wild horse eventually. It took a few years, but I'm so glad I did. But anyway, if I turn, see how I get sidetracked? Terrible. Yeah. If you turn it the other way, can you see what it is? It's a lady's leg with stockings and garter. Isn't that wonderful? I always have something to show and tell, don't I? I just remembered this when I saw that pipe in that illustration. So here we are at the Brontë Parsonage website, the Brontë Society website, I should say, which is in the Brontë Parsonage Museum. And there we have Haworth. Not Haworth. Was it? I've forgotten how to pronounce it again. Haworth. There you go. Haworth, lad. It's Haworth, not Haworth. Haworth. How can I forget that? There we go. I'm not drunk, by the way. Beautiful little town, though, isn't it? I can't believe I haven't been there. I love England, been to many places. So we've got Haworth there. We've already seen that picture. Family history. You can go to Brontë Places, where they've obviously visited. Wuthering Heights. There we go. Tells you all about how the novel was structured. The tenant of Wildfell Hall. Hopefully it's not Wildfell Hall, and I've been pronouncing that wrong as well. Anyway, I found a few tidbits elsewhere, and this is a site from the northernlifemagazine.co.uk, and it's about the haunted Black Bull in Haworth. That pub where Branwell sat, right in that chair there with his pipe, right next to the bell. Can't see the bell there. It rings for a nice steaming hot ale. I think they served ale warm, didn't they? Or at least punch. So, a curiously fascinating hair-raising read by Nick Tyler, who has sifted through and dug out the creepiest tales of Yorkshire and presented them in short snippets for our reading pleasure. Here we take a look at the Black Bull in Haworth. A jealous sibling, a restless spirit, and a tingling recent tale of a child offering sweets into thin air sat in what locals will name as the epicenter of paranormal activity. Maybe you've even been here yourself and even sat on the ghost's very chair. So, this is all about, yeah, you can read that if you pause it. Here we go, an eerie silhouette that almost looks to be haunting the painting. That's about the painting, yeah. We've already explained that. Okay. The epicenter of the paranormal phenomena seems to be within the walls of the Black Bull, Branwell's second home, as it was known. The ghostly apparitions of two men, always sitting at the same table and quarrelling, are often spotted by guests and staff. One of them is wearing casual attire, while the other is dressed in finery, including a jacket and a top hat. Well, that could be Branwell arguing with one of the peasants, my lord. Ghostly footsteps have often been heard stomping towards it before the creaking sound of an invisible presence sitting on the seat. Ooh. Another mysterious entity is often spotted by the end of the bar, but some claim this to be the same spirit as the one of the aforementioned gentleman. The apparition appears, taking a drink before vanishing in front of the bewildered spectator's eyes. Well, he knows what he's there for, doesn't he? Huh? He's making sure he gets a quick snifter before vanishing. That would be me too if I'm making the effort to come from the spirit world. I want to get the most out of it. Branwell's violent drunken outbursts were no secret, and others drinking in the Black Bull back in the mid-19th century were quite used to his temper. It is now believed that Branwell's spirit is responsible for the glasses and ashtrays that are thrown around the bar by an unseen hand. His old chair is still located within the pub. Actually, it's not. The pub has a replica of the chair, which was made by a local carpenter many decades ago. The actual real chair is in the Brontë Museum, which I have heard anyway. His old chair is still located within the pub. No, as something of an attraction, and ghostly footsteps have often been heard stomping towards it before creaking. I just read that before. What are they doing? It was said that at the funeral of Charlotte Brontë, a mysterious figure appeared to have been standing with the mourners, yet no one knew who he was. That must be Branwell. He's the eerie silhouette, you know. Oh, aye. Anyway, it goes on. I will leave the link. If I forget, please remind me. We will now go to the real-life Brontë scandal, and this is about Mrs. Robinson. Where are we? There's a song about Mrs. Robinson, isn't there? This is about the affair that he had with Lydia Robinson, and the Brontë Society has it slightly differently from above. You can read that later. It's just saying that she had seduced him. But the Brontë Society's official biography of Branwell has it slightly differently. He was sacked in July 1845, it agrees, but while the details are not fully known, it says Branwell seems to have misjudged his relationship with his employer's wife. Branwell's own story that he and Mrs. Robinson were in love is not corroborated from any other source. Thorpe Green Hall was destroyed by fire in 1895, and actually those images that I showed you during the presentation were taken directly from my book that I have here, the biography. I couldn't find any images of it on the internet. A few years later, in 1912, a new hall was built next to it where the old one had stood. So apparently this is the excuse she gave to Branwell why she didn't want to have an affair or continue the affair. Mrs. Robinson informed him of her husband's will, stipulated that if she were ever to resume her relationship with him, she would lose the estate and access to her children. But such a clause didn't exist in the will, Anne says. It would seem she simply wanted nothing more to do with him. And so this is interesting. And so what of Mrs. Robinson? In 1848, the year Branwell died, she married a wealthy widow, Sir Edward Dolman Scott, and became Lady Scott. He was 75 and she was 48. My goodness. Well, she was going to inherit a fortune and not have to live with him that long. That's about it. And one last little visit here to abcbookworld.com. It's about this lady. This is tagged supernatural, by the way. She believes that she has had relationships with John Lennon in previous lifetimes, right? You're probably wondering, what has this to do with Branwell Brontë? Bear with me, my dear friends. So she has this inescapable feeling that she had been John Lennon's lover long, long ago in a medieval English village during the 1600s. And she wrote a whole book about this. You can buy her book if you wish. It could be quite interesting because I did find out some uncanny aspects of her story did match up with some historical records. I'm not sure whether it says it on here. We'll have a look. She believed that John Lennon was the reincarnation of the troubled Branwell Brontë. And apparently the silhouette of John Lennon and Branwell Brontë look eerily similar. Anyway, I'll leave the link to that site as well. But there is some uncanny links to her story and historical records. I can't remember what they are anymore, though. Well, before I go, I have one last show and tell. And here it is. If you remember during the presentation about the Brontë sisters and Branwell were creating these miniature books, well, I just remembered I also have a miniature book. Another thing that my mother handed down to me was this miniature atlas, and if we have a close-up, here we see a better close-up of the atlas there. The two badges on each side, I just stuck them there, because they're British World War II badges. Only one order, forward, the flag that rules. Yeah, so this atlas was given to me by my mother, very special. I've kept it for many, many years. And there's a website also which mentions them. You can buy these. There was a few of them made. Then I don't think there's that many of them around, but there are a few. I think they're worth about £200 to £300 for one of these. Maybe you can get it cheaper depending on the condition. Yeah, as you can see inside the front cover, Atlas of the British Empire, reproduced from the original, made for Her Majesty Queen Mary's dollhouse by Edward Stanford Limited, cartographers to the King. And here I found the listing for it on a website. So here we have it, Atlas of the British Empire, the smallest miniature atlas in existence. You can see it was made in 1928, and this one is already sold. They're usually sold very quickly if you ever see one. Yeah, beautiful, and it's got, it's lettered in gilt, and the edges are gilt. It's really well made. A fine miniature atlas produced from the original, made in 1922 for Queen Mary's dollhouse. The doll's house was built between 1921 and 1924 from the designs of the leading architect Sir Edwin Lutyens, not really sure how you pronounce that. The 4-story Palladian villa was constructed in 1/12 scale, and it exhibited the finest British craftsmanship of the period. The library consists of 200 books, which were commissioned to the leading names of the time. Isn't that amazing? 200 books. Let's see if we can find a picture of that. Stanford's atlas is accurately drawn, showing British possessions in red. The world map is potentially the smallest world map ever printed. Wow. Let's see if we can find Queen Mary's dollhouse. So let's have a look. So here we go. This is from theguardian.com, and here is the doll's house. Isn't that gorgeous? Isn't that absolutely amazing? I've never seen that before. This is the first time. I've never even bothered to look it up. And look, these are the miniature books that were made for the library. Wow. Isn't that fantastic? That is absolutely beautiful. And there is the lady in question. Is there any more pics of the doll's house? There's one of the miniature books. Aren't they beautiful? I'm sure there's some more photos. I'm not going to look now, but before I go, I'm going to leave you with a sort of blooper. I just couldn't get it out. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, my friends, take care, God bless, and bye-bye. Played the organ. Stop it. Played the organ in his... It's very puerile. Stop it. Played the organ... Oh, no. Played the organ... I've got to stimmy that laughter rising up from my stomach. Played the organ in his father's church and aspired to being a professional portrait painter.